Day 467 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a brief look at those Russian losses, and currently, Russia is now sitting on over 210,000 military personnel losses, so this does not include the WIA or the wounded in action, and in terms of hardware losses, 11 tanks, 11 APVs, 12 artillery, and a whopping 5 air defense systems. So these are quite some substantial figures, to say the least, for the day. And we'll get into explaining why that is quite shortly. But first off, we'll move back across to the map and we'll start out in the Russian region of Belgorod that I like to start off with at the moment, as the Russian invasion of Russia continues. So there's ongoing battles within the Russian territory in this oblast, as several towns just past the border are announced as under control of these anti-Kremlin Russian militia groups, including the town of Shebekino, so zoom right in there for that one, and also Novodorivka, but also really close to the border, Novaya Tavalzenka. In fact, now we've, just for this settlement here, just across the border, we've now seen some footage and some stills of some recent previous but recent street fight in there as well. And this isn't just the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Free Russia Legion engaged in military actions here in Belgorod, but it's now also confirmed to include the Polish Volunteer Corps as part of these efforts, as they published a bunch of pictures, including ones showing a captured Russian BTR too. Now, in a classic Russian army response, they attempted to flatten the Russian border town with artillery, but they never seemed to dislodge those few rifle squads from the area. Then also in the Belgorod district of the oblast of the same name there was some energy infrastructure that went up in flames. And it was said to be due to an unknown drone, as per the governor of the region. And in that fiery spirit, a factory in Nizhny Novgorod, which is about 200 miles east of Moscow, was also on fire there too. Now, this plant produces fasteners, springs, and wires, so potentially with some military application value, which means sometimes we are looking at the case of some renegades that saw fit to cause a fuss here. Then we'll head back across to the Ukrainian map, where the Ukrainian forces have actually been asking for operational silence in relation to their upcoming or existing counteroffensive operations in the country. In fact, they put out a whole video about it yesterday there. But there is still a bunch of stuff that is universally known, so let's start there, shall we? As for instance, in the Donbass, pro-Russian media has been citing Russian forces saying that Ukraine has re-entered Bakhmut, so the AFU, which would be somewhat hilarious if true, given how Bakhmut is now pretty much entirely defended by the regular Russian army after Wagner's recent vacating of the region. But more specifically, it was said that Ukraine's re-entering into Bakhmut may have occurred on the southwestern side of the city, from what we know so far. Then in the Donbass, quite a bit lower, so heavy clashes and battles rage in Marinka. So Marinka, there we go, once more. And so Marinka is a location on the map with practically zero push from the Russian side, since even before Bakhmut was really a hot zone. We're talking a good 12 months or so. But hey, right now the field flares up again. And it's possibly due to the introduction of Little Kadyrov's Chechen forces now in the region. Then elsewhere, somewhere in the east region, we have a Russian Telar Buk M2 air defense system was destroyed by a precision strike from the Ukrainian forces, presumably in the Luhansk Oblast, from what we know. And they call these ones TELAR, which is an acronym, in fact, because it includes everything such as the transporter, the erector, the launcher, and the radar, which makes it quite the mobile unit, although, of course, susceptible to a one-hit, one-kill scenario. Then we'll move down a bit south and cross paths between the Donbass and the Zaporizhia Oblast, as multiple Russian channels claimed that since 4 a.m. this morning, hostilities very close to the front line were occurring near Remivka. So we'll zoom in there for that one. There we go. And not just here, but several other locations, including Novodorivka to the west, which is technically Zaporizhia territory, as you can see it just on the Oblast border. Oh, and a settlement of which, this one right here, Novodorivka, that has been liberated as well, as it's been advised. In fact, if we were to zoom out for just a hot second, Ukrainian offensive engagements occurred pretty much around this big frontline bulge right here, to put it quite simply. Oh, and I will just quickly mention, even just below, see on the Russian-occupied side, the red side there, Neskuchna was said to be liberated by the AFU as well. So, very interesting to see as well. Oh, and not to mention a T-80, a Russian T-80 tank, Kukov, just back to the west there, Novodorivka, doing a bit of cook-off there. But as for other parts of Zaporizhia, we don't know a great deal of information right now, but interestingly, at Mikhailivka, right here, which is some ways away back from the front lines there, about 30 kilometers, which is about 20 miles, was reported by the Russian forces to be under fire and taking a heavy beating from the AFU. And as I said, a lot of these engagements are being kept pretty close to the chest by the armed forces of Ukraine right now, which is quite reminiscent of how it occurred in Kherson all those months ago on the right bank, how it all played out with the liberation. So interesting times indeed. And what I used to do during counter-offensive operations, not saying that that's happening, it could be just skirmishes here and there, but it does seem a little more than that. And I used to take a look at the weather in these regions. So if we take a quick sneak peek of the weather in the region, it's mostly free of rain for the week, some clouds and some sunny skies, so right for the picking. But in the end, a very fluid situation right now, nonetheless. So let's see how this progresses over the days and weeks ahead, shall we? Oh, and I will mention, in these sorts of instances, just like the past, it's actually slower to have the map update to see the newly liberated territory. It's just, that means it's part of an ongoing existing operational counter-offensive operation, likely. Cannot confirm or deny, but yeah, we are actually slower to see some map updates as a result. Then, speaking of Kherson from a moment ago, the Russian-occupied area, so on the left bank of the Dnipro River, wasn't left out of the mix either today, as there was some notable heavy attacks in the Russian-occupied region just below the river. Then we'll move across to some news for today. So this one is more training-related, you could say. But so here we have Ukrainian soldiers training for wet gap crossings with live explosives, and look at that beauty. And I can all but guarantee that the Russian mobilized have been missing out on this type of training. In fact, there's still many reports to suggest that they don't even get any training, just pushed across to the front line. Then in some other news, due to all this Russian war spending in Ukraine, there's been an assessment by the Bank of Finland's research team where they have estimated that Russian pension assets or funds may run out by the end of 2023. And there's a lot going on here, more than I could possibly mention right now. But so a couple of years ago, for instance, Putin tried to increase the retirement or the pension age in Russia, only to then realize this is his single biggest demographic of a voting age, or better to say, Putin's supporter age, given that those elections are well and truly rigged. So when the pension age increase was raised in Russia a couple of years ago, the public was, as a result, quite enraged by that. So Putin had to dial it all back and just blamed it on one of his ministers in order to save face. So cowardly. Classic Putin, by the way. Always blaming his ministers when something goes wrong. And really, the reality is those Russian pensioners really rely on those pensions. Then add to that the cost of living increases in Russia now, which has come up quite significantly, which could end up all being one of the ultimate backfires for Russia as part of this war. And I've said it before, but the way that Russia loses in this war is by running out of something. It could be military hardware, which is likely, or personnel, also likely, or the loss of land, that's a good one. But it could simply be because of money. That is, the economy could collapse, in other words, due to a war that Russia simply cannot afford. Then in some other news, there's been more seeds of discontent sowed between the regular Russian army and the Wagner PMC. So in this instance, we have a regular Russian army commander detained by the Wagner PMC, if you can believe it. And he was detained or caught, let's say, after he and his unit were caught firing on Wagner columns as they were presumably driving away out of the Donbass. And I mean, can you imagine? Russia is doing the work for the Ukrainians here. And the larger point here is that the whole of the Russian army in its complete totality is far from one cohesive group. But I'm just hoping that this feud continues until Prigozhin decides to pack up shop and join one of the anti-Kremlin militia groups in Belgorod instead. Wouldn't that be a sight to see? That's unlikely, but he could, for instance, create a third militia group, or keep the same one and just change objectives. Then in a couple of quick funnies to round it all off for today, guys. So the occupied Crimean Peninsula is still getting its TV stations hacked by Ukraine. This must be the third or fourth time at least now. And this time it was broadcasting the earlier video I showed of the AFU talking about operational silence and upcoming counteroffensives in what was probably designed, at least in part, to taunt the occupation authorities in the region. Then in a final funny, so this one's a bit odd perhaps, but anything Kadyrov related I love. So Chechen and TikTok army leader Kadyrov himself appealed to Putin to send his Chechen units to the Belgorod region to support the border mishaps Russia is experiencing right now. And so he said, quote, to eliminate a gang on Russian territory without consequence for the civilian population and infrastructure. I doubt it. And he also said regarding him and his crew having special knowledge and training that is required. I mean, he was put in the Donbass to perform a job and to take over or take off from where the Wagner forces left off. So has he already had enough of the Donbass? I mean, there's really recently already been a number of embarrassing clashes for the Russian forces. Quite recently there, the Donbass, even Zaporizhia. So I'm guessing there's at least in part a chance he's already realizing that taking the Donbass is a much harder job than he thought. Just like his predecessor Prigozhin warned him about. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe. Thanks again for all of your support. I'm seeing it all and I really appreciate it to keep the channel going. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.